Composting can be simple if you have the right tools, but with so many gadgets and bins on the market, it's easy to get overwhelmed. Today I'll show you what works, what doesn't, and how to compost smarter, not harder, so you can get finished compost sooner. Here are some big questions composters often ask. What are the best composting tools? Does bin size really matter? Are tumblers worth it? How to aerate your compost? Do you need a compost thermometer? Do shredders really help? And what's the best way to store food scraps? Here's what you need to know. Just like a good chef needs the right kitchen gadgets, a composter benefits from the right tools. Using the right equipment can make your composting easier, faster, and more efficient, which means you can serve your plants nutrient-rich meals in short order and even have a good time doing it. And when it comes to composting tools and gadgets, you can see that there are a lot of choices. So let's begin with a broad overview, a look at bins and essential tools for composting, including tools that work and tools that, well, don't work so well. We'll look at key points and what to look for when building or buying tools for making compost. First, we have the traditional wood compost bins. Still, many options. But first and foremost, when it comes to composting, size matters. Whether you're buying ready-made bins and tumblers or making your own, the minimum size container you want to shoot for is 3 by 3 by 3 feet. That is 27 cubic feet. Now, why is size so important? Because a compost bin that's at least 3 by 3 by 3 feet, this creates enough mass to generate heat, which helps break down materials more quickly. In addition to heat, this size helps maintain moisture levels for the microbes to do their work while you're sleeping, right? Plus, a larger bin makes it easier to turn the pile and allow for better airflow, which reduces that stinky smell problem and keeps pests away. Now, traditional compost bins provide a simple, contained space for breaking down food scraps and yard waste. They help keep the pile tidy looking, retain moisture, and offer protection from pests. These bins can be made from wood, wire, plastic, or concrete, all kinds of materials. Now, bins work best when you regularly turn the materials to speed up decomposition. They're ideal for backyard composting because they make it easy to convert everyday household organic waste into nutrient-rich compost for your garden. There are many ways to make a compost bin, from simple do-it-yourself setups using pallets or wire mesh to store-bought plastic or wooden bins made from used wood or finished lumber. You can find plenty of plans and ideas in books, online, or even by checking out a neighbor's setup. This drawing shows a 3-bin system with screens on the sides, at the back, and in between the different bins. In the front are boards or bin boards, which slip in and out of slots on the sides. This is a convenient way to keep materials neat and tidy as you turn the pile, add ingredients, and remove finished compost without hurting your back. So let's go through some pointers to keep in mind. Doing it by the numbers. Number 1 is a flat board that is really handy when chopping thick stems of broccoli or other plant material, and then it just plops right into the bin. Number 2 shows wood. This is all like used plywood that we replaced the screens with. We found that when we made this setup, we put screens in at first, but as we started turning the pile with a pitchfork, the tines got jammed up in the holes in the screen. So we simply put plywood over the screen, and now it's much easier to turn the pile and scrape down ingredients. Number 3 shows a piece of foam insulation. Some sort of cover helps retain moisture and heat while your compost is working. You can use a chunk of old carpet, pieces of plywood, pieces of cardboard, even blankets work. Number 4, this is a compost thermometer. We're going to talk about that in a minute. And number 5 are the horizontal boards for slipping in and out. And number 6 are the uprates that keep these boards in place. Now here's a homemade setup that shows the lid propped up with a stick. And there are, let's see, in the horizontal boards, there's some slots created, which makes it easier to pull them in and out or up and down. This is a very skookum setup, pretty heavy duty. It's a little larger. The bins are like, well, I don't know, probably 4 feet or 4.5 feet square. So you can get a lot of material composting at one time. The idea is to maybe start it in one bin, you turn it into the next bin, and you start a new batch in the first bin. Anyway, it's like a hopscotch kind of thing. Pretty heavy duty top too. This lid is slanted so that the rain falls to the back. And it's also built with pallets, like substantial looking pallets. It must be probably 5 or 6 feet tall, with the horizontal boards for accessing in and out. I want to say something about using pallets. It's a great do-it-yourself idea, using materials at hand. It can get a little awkward when the materials get stuck in between the boards there, you see. Here's another set of bins, a single bin on the left and then 2 bins on the right. I'm not sure if those bottom boards are permanent or not, but if they are, it might be a little more awkward to turn the pile. Here's more by the numbers. This is what we expanded our single bin system into a 3-bin setup. And then number 1, we have a nice cover to keep the rain out. Number 2 is our garden shed, which is kind of an integral part of this whole kind of composting station. 3 shows the 3 bins. And above that, number 4 is we set up some shelving for gardening supplies and seed starting trays, etc. And they keep nice and dry. And number 5 is where I store the horizontal bins, so they're really handy. As for compost tumblers and standalone bins, there's some pros and cons. The benefits are generally they're easy to turn. The instructions will say, just rotate the drum, no pitchfork needed. They're basically neat and compact, and so they're wonderful for small spaces. And the enclosed design helps keep out pests. The negative sides, well, they're limited in their capacity. They don't heat up as much as larger compost piles do. They can become waterlogged, heavy, and difficult to turn. And some models crack or fall apart in short time, especially in severe weather conditions. Now, I wanted to reiterate that size matters. The minimum size container for composting is 3 by 3 by 3 feet, or 27 cubic feet, right? So the problem is that most store-bought tumbler-style composters or standalone bins are about 10 cubic feet or less. That's about 1/3 of the ideal size. So materials don't heat up properly to decompose. So this is what you might see in an advertisement, either one of these types of containers, and they're just too small. And when you see the nice, fluffy, compost-looking material coming out the bottom, that is not how it happens. So let's say you're browsing online or your local hardware store is having a sale on compost bins. You check them out and wow, there are just so many options, and where do you even start and who to believe? The pictures make it look so easy and convenient, and the claims so enticing. Thing is, it's a buyer beware world. Finished compost does not come out of the drum looking soft and fluffy like this. and you can't get finished compost in 2 weeks, nowhere near what you see here. This is usually what happens. You kind of have a mucky mess or a dry, chunky mess, or a heavy, stinky mass of organic gunk and a tumbler that, well, is hard to tumble. So let's move on to another tool, one of my favorites, pitchforks. A pitchfork is a composter's right-hand helper, from turning compost to keeping it aerated and breaking down materials to loading up a wheelbarrow. Now, 3 to 5 tines is ideal. Any more and it becomes kind of unwieldy. Now, this tool is not a pitchfork. This is a potato fork, as one of my friends call it. This is used for digging up root crops because they have the blunt tines. And then we have compost aerators. Now, these turning tools are designed to mix and loosen the pile, helping to improve airflow and speed up decomposition. Sounds good, but how do they compare to pitchforks? So let's do a little comparison of aerators and turning tools versus a simple pitchfork. Now, many aerators only reach the surface layers, while a pitchfork can turn deeper sections for better airflow. Pitchforks allow you to mix, lift, and break up clumps more easily, while turning tools often have a fixed motion that doesn't fully mix the pile. Some aerators struggle with large, dense piles, whereas a pitchfork is more versatile for different compost sizes and makeup. Some aerator designs get stuck or even clogged with wet, compacted compost, making them harder to use. And then many aerators are made with a lightweight metal that can eventually bend or snap, while a sturdy pitchfork will last you for years. In the end, a pitchfork remains one of the best all-around tools for composting because it's simple, reliable, and effective for turning and mixing the pile. Next up is compost thermometers. Well, I'd say next to a compost buddy to share experiences with, a compost thermometer is your best friend. You don't want to compost without it. In fact, to not use a compost thermometer is like, well, vacuuming in the dark. A compost thermometer helps you monitor heat levels inside the pile. In other words, it tracks progress, letting you know when to turn the pile, which leads to high-quality decomposed compost. Now, here are 4 things to look for when buying a compost thermometer. Length. A 20 to 24-inch probe reaches deep into the pile, whether in a bin or a tumbler. The temperature range should measure up to at least 160 degrees Fahrenheit or 70 degrees Celsius. It should be made for durability's sake out of stainless steel, and a sealed display prevents moisture buildup inside. Now, here's what is extra but helpful is a handle, as in the orange ring you see on the left. This protects the dial and makes it easier to handle and move around from place to place. Now, this might be Captain Obvious here, but having a hose that's handy is really important. You want to monitor the moisture content because as the compost materials break down, water is used up. And then sifting tools for finished compost, whether it's a screen or a flat blade shovel, this is very helpful for sifting out maybe some chunky stuff, which can be used in other places, and the fine materials. And then buckets and totes and containers. It's handy to have a setup like this so that when you don't have an active compost pile going, you can at least save your food scraps and throw them in a tote like this and just layer it with leaves until you have enough materials to make a next batch, a full batch of compost. Now, a little word about wheelbarrows. Now, here's how to outsmart a wheelbarrow. Whenever we're loading up a wheelbarrow, it's better to put the lighter materials on the bottom and the heavier materials on the top. Instead of trying to dig down and stir up the heavy materials from the bottom, it's a lot easier to stir up your ingredients. Light stuff on the bottom, heavy stuff on the top. And where would we be without 5-gallon buckets and pails? Then there are kitchen composters. These are indoor units that don't really make compost, but they reduce the ingredients that you can then add to the compost pile or directly to the soil. And the blender makes short order of kitchen scraps by reducing them to a slurry, which you can pour directly into a hole in the soil or then put it in your compost pile. Now, while not entirely necessary, mulchers and shredders speed up composting by breaking materials into smaller pieces. By increasing the surface area, they give microbes more access to break down organic material efficiently. Shredded materials also help balance moisture by allowing materials to absorb and retain water more effectively, creating ideal composting conditions. Motorized shredders, well, it goes without saying, they can break down leaves in seconds. You can also make your own do-it-yourself shredders. Here's one idea. Place materials in a sturdy bucket and use a drill with a mixing bit or a weed eater to break them down. It's a simple way to shred compost materials with tools you might already have on hand. And now to worm composting or vermicomposting. This can be done using a stackable worm bin, a simple plastic tote, or a bucket with drainage holes, or a larger outdoor worm bed. The right tools makes composting easier and more efficient. Pitchforks and to some extent aerators help turn and aerate the pile, keeping decomposition on track. Shredders and mulchers break down material faster. A compost thermometer lets you monitor the pile's temperature so you know when to turn it, while sieves and screens help refine your finished compost. For worm composting, stackable bins or simple totes provide the perfect home for worms to do their work. With the right tools, you'll compost smarter, not harder.